It all started during a chaotic study group in college where Jake and I first crossed paths. We were thrown together by chance, two strangers bonded over a shared disdain for the mundane, while others crammed for finals or obsessed over their perfect grades. We found ourselves laughing uncontrollably at some god-awful horror movie, playing on a cracked laptop in the corner of the library. That night, amidst cheap pizza and terrible acting, something clicked between us, a connection neither of us expected but both desperately needed. Over time, our friendship grew stronger, fortified by quirks only we understood, midnight marathons of B-grade horror flicks, late-night pizza runs to the sketchiest joint in town, and inside jokes that made no sense to anyone else. But what truly cemented Jake as my person wasn't just those quirky moments. It was how he showed up when life decided to punch me in the gut. When my last relationship ended in flames, leaving me shattered and questioning every decision I'd ever made, Jake didn't hesitate. He showed up at my door with coffee, bad puns, and an unspoken promise that everything would eventually be okay. And then there was the day I got fired, an event so humiliating that I couldn't even muster the energy to leave my apartment. Jake didn't let me wallow. Instead, he dragged me out for greasy food and forced me to laugh until tears streamed down my face. The moment that changed everything, though, happened one rainy evening when fate decided to test us. Crossing the street after grabbing takeout, I barely noticed the headlights bearing down on me until Jake lunged forward, yanking me back onto the sidewalk. The car screeched past, inches from where I'd been standing. My heart pounded like a war drum, adrenaline surging through my veins as I stared into Jake's wide, panicked eyes. "You scared the hell out of me," he muttered, his grip still firm around my arm. In that split second, I realized how much he cared, not because he said it, but because his body had reacted before his mind could catch up. From that day on, trust became the cornerstone of our bond. It wasn't just about shared laughs anymore. It was knowing he'd risk his own safety to protect mine. Jake wasn't just my best friend, he was my anchor, the one person who kept me grounded when the world threatened to spin out of control. It was one of those nights where the world felt softer, blurred by the haze of too many beers and the weightless freedom that comes with letting go. Jake and I had spent hours laughing at old stories, replaying memories like a favorite song on repeat. But then, as if a switch had flipped, the mood shifted. His voice cut through the hum of conversation, low and deliberate. "What if we just tried it?" The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and impossible to ignore. He didn't even look at me when he said it, his focus fixed on the bottle in his hands, swirling the last dregs of beer like they held some secret answer. My first reaction was visceral, a hard no, sharp and immediate. "Jake, no," I snapped, my tone clipped enough to make him glance up. But the moment our eyes met, something flickered behind his gaze, something dark, knowing, like he'd already guessed, I wouldn't hold that line for long. My stomach twisted into knots. I wanted to believe it was disgust or discomfort, but deep down I knew better. Beneath the surface, curiosity stirred, restless and electric. I tried to shut it down. "We're friends, Jake. Just friends." The words sounded hollow, even to me, because suddenly, all I could think about were the moments I'd buried under layers of denial. The way his hand lingered on mine once when passing a menu. The way his laughter always seemed to vibrate through my chest. And those looks. God, those looks. They weren't accidental. They never had been. I'd caught him staring more times than I cared to admit, his eyes tracing the curve of my jaw, the slope of my shoulders. Each glance felt like a question left unanswered, a spark waiting for fuel. The alcohol wasn't helping. It loosened my defenses, whispering dangerous thoughts into my ear. What would it feel like? Would it be different from anyone else? Worse yet, I realized I'd imagined this before, not just once, but over and over again. Late at night, lying awake, I'd wondered what lay beneath the surface of our friendship. Was it possible to cross that line and come back unscathed? And then there was the way Jake looked at me now, his expression unreadable, but charged with something raw and magnetic. Every instinct screamed to leave, to protect the fragile balance we built. But another part of me, a reckless, hungry part, wanted to lean closer to see how far we could push before everything unraveled. My pulse quickened, pounding in my ears like a war drum. I told myself it was just the alcohol, just the moment, but deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was desire, simmering just below the surface, threatening to boil over. The hours leading up to that night felt like an eternity. I stood in front of my closet, staring at the clothes as if they held some secret answer to a question I wasn't even sure how to ask. Too revealing, and it would scream desperation, a neon sign flashing, "I want more than just tonight." Too conservative, and I might as well wear a sign that said, "Let's keep this awkward." My hands trembled as I pulled out one outfit after another, each rejected for reasons I couldn't fully articulate. Finally, I settled on something neutral, a fitted sweater and jeans, but the knot in my stomach only tightened. It was perfect, or so I told myself, but perfection didn't matter here. Nothing could mask the storm brewing inside me. To ease the tension, or maybe to give myself something to focus on, I decided to bring wine. Not the cheap stuff we usually drank during movie nights, but an expensive bottle I'd been saving for who knows what occasion. As I walked to Jake's apartment, the weight of the bottle in my hand became almost unbearable. Every step felt heavier than the last, and when a gust of wind nearly knocked me off balance, I fumbled with the bag. The bottle slipped from my grasp, clinking dangerously against the ground before I caught it just in time. My heart raced, not just from the near disaster, but from the symbolism of it all. One wrong move, and everything could shatter. When I arrived at his door, my nerves were frayed like old rope. Jake greeted me with a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He had clearly put effort into setting the mood soft music played in the background. Candles flickered faintly on the coffee table, and the scent of incense lingered in the air. Yet there was an undercurrent of unease, a quiet hum of anticipation neither of us could ignore. "Hey," he said, his voice steady but tinged with something fragile, like glass about to crack. We exchanged pleasantries, though every word felt forced, hollow. His jokes landed flat, his laughter trailing off too quickly, and his gaze darted around the room like he was searching for an escape route. What struck me most was how different he seemed. Jake, the guy who always knew what to say, who never hesitated to tease or comfort, was suddenly unsure of himself. His fingers tapped nervously against the counter while he poured drinks, and when our eyes met briefly, he looked away too fast. For someone who claimed this was no big deal, he sure acted like it was. And yet, despite his apparent anxiety, there was something magnetic about him. Maybe it was the way his jaw tightened when he thought I wasn't looking, or the subtle intensity in his movements. Whatever it was, it made my pulse quicken even more. The evening began innocently enough, or at least we tried to make it seem that way. We laughed about work, teased each other over inside jokes only we understood, and opened a bottle of wine as if this were just another Friday night. But beneath the surface, the air crackled with an unspoken tension, like static electricity waiting for a spark. Every word felt heavier than usual, every glance charged with something neither of us dared to name. The casualness was forced, fragile, a thin veneer masking the storm brewing underneath. Then it happened. Jake's hand brushed against mine as he handed me my glass of wine. It wasn't intentional, at least. I didn't think it was. But instead of pulling away, his fingers lingered there, grazing my skin ever so slightly. My breath hitched, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. His touch was warm, deliberate, sending a jolt through me that I couldn't ignore. I looked up, half expecting him to laugh it off, but his expression had shifted. Gone was the easy grin. In its place was something darker, more intense, a look that said he'd been thinking about this far longer than either of us cared to admit. From that point on, the pretense shattered. When his palm grazed my waist while reaching for the remote, it wasn't accidental anymore. He let his hand rest there, fingertips tracing slow circles against my side, igniting a fire I hadn't realized was smoldering beneath the surface. My body betrayed me before my mind could catch up. A shiver ran down my spine, and my pulse quickened until I thought it might burst out of my chest. And then his lips found mine, tentative at first, testing whether I'd pull away. But when I didn't, the kiss deepened, consuming me whole. His mouth moved against mine with a hunger that left no room for doubt. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was something raw, primal, clawing its way to the surface after years of being buried under layers of friendship. With every touch, every movement, Jake seemed to claim me, his hands mapping every curve of my body like he'd memorized them long before tonight. His fingers tangled in my hair, tugging just hard enough to send shockwaves through me, while his teeth grazed my neck, leaving trails of heat in their wake. Each action carried a weight that went beyond physical. It was as though he was affirming something he'd kept hidden for years. My own reaction surprised me. The arch of my back, the involuntary moans escaping my lips, the desperate way I clung to him, all of it spoke to emotions I'd fought so hard to. In the height of it all, as our bodies moved together in a rhythm that felt both foreign and instinctual, clarity hit me like a thunderclap. This wasn't just about satisfying some fleeting curiosity. It was deeper, sharper, more painful because it meant acknowledging everything I'd tried to deny. That somewhere along the way, my feelings for Jake had grown into something far more complicated than mere friendship. And now there was no turning back. The aftermath hit me like a freight train, crashing into the fragile calm we'd briefly found. The room was silent except for the sound of our ragged breathing, each inhale and exhale heavy with unspoken words. We lay there in the dark, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, neither of us moving or daring to speak. My mind raced, replaying every touch, every kiss, every moment that had shattered the boundaries we'd sworn never to cross. Happiness warred with terror inside me, a strange cocktail of euphoria and dread. I felt alive in a way I hadn't before, but at the same time, I couldn't shake the gnawing fear that this night would change everything between us forever. Jake shifted first, his fingers brushing absently against my arm. "Well," he said, his voice cracking slightly as if the word itself weighed too much to carry. "That was intense." He tried to laugh, but it came out strained, brittle like glass on the verge of shattering. His attempt at humor hung awkwardly in the air, dissolving into nothingness without an answer from me. For someone who always knew what to say, Jake suddenly seemed lost, unsure of how to navigate this new terrain we'd stumbled into together. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I sat up slowly, pulling the sheet around myself like armor, though it did little to shield me from the storm brewing within. Every movement felt deliberate, exaggerated, the rustle of fabric loud enough to fill the silence. I reached for my clothes, fumbling with trembling hands as I pulled on my shirt and jeans. Each button I fastened felt like sealing off another piece of myself, building walls where none had existed before. My heart ached with every motion, torn between wanting to stay and needing to escape. As I dressed, Jake watched me, his gaze heavy with questions neither of us dared to ask. Was this a mistake? Could we go back? What did this mean for us, for our friendship? The uncertainty loomed over us, suffocating and relentless. When I finally stood, ready to leave, he reached out, his hand grazing mine once more. This time his touch was hesitant, almost reverent, as if afraid I might pull away. And maybe I should have. But I didn't. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't bear the thought of rejecting him twice in one night. Walking home, the cold night air bit at my skin, but it was nothing compared to the ache in my chest. My mind swirled with conflicting emotions, guilt for crossing the line, longing for what we'd shared, and fear of what came next. Could I face him again tomorrow, laugh at his jokes, pretend nothing had changed? Or would every glance, every accidental brush of hands now carry the weight of what we'd done? The simplicity of our friendship was gone, replaced by something messy, complicated, and achingly beautiful. And as much as I wanted to regret it, I couldn't. Because even amidst the chaos, one truth remained undeniable. Jake wasn't just my best friend anymore, and maybe he never really was. The days that followed were a blur of forced normalcy, a brittle attempt to pretend the past was just that past. We fell back into our routines with an almost desperate determination, meeting for coffee, laughing at the same dumb jokes we always had. But beneath the surface, everything felt different. Every glance carried weight, every accidental touch electric with unspoken tension. It wasn't just awkward, it was suffocating, like trying to breathe underwater while pretending you weren't drowning. One afternoon, sitting in our usual spot at the cafe, Jake reached across the table to grab the sugar packet. His hand brushed mine, and we both flinched as though someone had shocked us. I pulled my hand back so quickly that the spoon clattered against the side of my cup, drawing a sharp glare from the barista. Jake froze, his fingers hovering midair before he withdrew them slowly, clearing his throat. "Sorry," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the hum of conversation around us. He didn't meet my eyes, and neither did I. Instead, I focused on stirring my coffee, swirling the liquid until it formed tiny whirlpools, anything to avoid looking at him. But avoiding him entirely proved harder than I thought. At first, I told myself it was temporary, a brief reprieve to process what had happened. Yet the more I stayed away, the more vivid the memories became. Late at night, lying in bed, I could still feel the roughness of his palms against my skin, hear the low groan that escaped his lips when our bodies moved together. I hated how those thoughts consumed me, how they crept into even the quietest moments of my day. And yet, whenever I considered reaching out, guilt stopped me cold. What would I even say? "Hey, remember that night? Let's talk about it, or not." When I did see him again, whether by accident or design, the ache in my chest grew unbearable. Once, walking through the park, I spotted him jogging toward me. For a moment, I debated turning around, but before I could move, he noticed me. His pace slowed, then stopped altogether. "Hey," he said, breathless for running or maybe something else. There was a pause, heavy and loaded, before he added, "You've been avoiding me." It wasn't a question, but an accusation, soft yet cutting. I opened my mouth to deny it, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "Just busy," I lied, knowing full well he wouldn't believe me. His gaze lingered on mine, searching for something I wasn't ready to give. Finally, he nodded, stepping aside to let me pass. As I walked away, I felt his eyes on my back, burning through the fabric of my jacket. Each step forward felt heavier than the last, pulling me further from him but closer to the truth. This wasn't over. Not for either of us. It was a Thursday evening when my phone buzzed, shattering the fragile equilibrium we'd been clinging to for weeks. Jake's name flashed on the screen, and my heart skipped a beat, not out of excitement, but dread. We hadn't talked about that night since it happened, each of us retreating into our own silent battlefields, tiptoeing around the wreckage of what used to be simple friendship. But this call felt different. His voice was uncharacteristically hesitant, the usual confidence replaced by something raw and vulnerable. "I can't stop thinking about you," he admitted, his words tumbling out like they'd been trapped inside him for too long. He wanted more than stolen glances, more than lingering touches in crowded coffee shops. He wanted us to try. For real. The weight of his confession crushed me. I sat there, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white, as if holding onto it could keep me from crumbling. Part of me, the selfish, reckless part, wanted to say yes. How could I not? Jake wasn't just my best friend. He was the person who knew me better than anyone else, who made me laugh until my sides hurt, who had been there through every high and low. The memory of his hands on my skin still haunted me, a ghost that refused to fade. But another part of me, the cautious, rational part, whispered warnings in my ear. What if we tried and failed? What if the love we built turned sour, leaving behind nothing but bitterness and regret? Losing him forever would destroy me. For days I wrestled with myself, torn between desire and fear. Every time I saw him, even casually, my chest tightened. His eyes searched mine, hopeful yet guarded, as though he already knew the answer but needed to hear it anyway. Finally, I called him over, knowing full well how much this conversation would cost us both. Sitting across from him at my kitchen table, I forced the words out, each syllable feeling like shards of glass slicing through my throat. "I can't risk losing you, Jake." "Not completely." My voice broke on the last word, tears threatening to spill over. His expression hardened, disappointment flashing across his face before he masked it with a tight smile. "I get it," he said softly, standing up to leave. "But don't expect things to go back to how they were." And they didn't. Days turned into weeks, and Jake began pulling away, canceling plans, ignoring texts, avoiding eye contact whenever our paths crossed. Each absence felt like a knife twisting deeper into the wound. I missed him desperately, not just as the man I'd shared something unforgettable with, but as the friend who had once been my anchor. Now, all I had left were fragments of what we used to be, scattered and irreparable. Trust, I realized too late, was both a shield and a key, a paradox that had protected us for years, while quietly unlocking doors we weren't ready to open. It wasn't just the foundation of our friendship. It was the reason Jake could look at me that night with such unspoken certainty, knowing I wouldn't run away even as everything changed between us. But trust doesn't come with guarantees. What happens when the person you trust most becomes the one who shatters your carefully constructed world? The desire that flared between us didn't ask permission. It surged forward like wildfire, consuming every boundary we'd ever drawn. One touch, one kiss, one moment of yielding was all it took to rewrite the rules entirely. And yet, the aftermath left me grappling with questions I couldn't answer. Was this what love felt like? Or was it simply lust wearing a disguise so convincing I mistook it for something deeper? Every glance from Jake now carried layers of meaning, his fingers brushing mine over coffee cups, his laughter trailing off too quickly, the way he hesitated before saying goodbye. These moments weren't innocent anymore. They were reminders of how far we'd fallen, how irreversibly altered our bond had become. The hardest part wasn't the loss of simplicity. It was realizing that some lines, once crossed, leave permanent scars. We tried to navigate the wreckage of our friendship, but no matter how hard we pretended, the air between us crackled with tension. A single accidental touch sent shockwaves through me, reigniting memories I thought I'd buried, the roughness of his hands on my skin, the desperation in his voice when he whispered my name. Each recollection felt like a betrayal of the person I used to be, the version of myself who believed life could remain neatly compartmentalized. In quieter moments, regret crept in like a thief in the night, not for what we did, but for what we lost. There's a peculiar kind of grief in watching something pure transform into something complicated. Our friendship, once so effortless, now required effort and invisible tax paid in awkward silences and stolen glances. And yet, despite the chaos, I couldn't bring myself to wish it undone. How could I regret something that taught me so much about vulnerability, about the fragility of human connection? Still, the truth lingered painfully clear. Crossing certain boundaries means losing pieces of yourself along the way. You can't reclaim innocence once it's gone, only hold on to fragments of what remains. Even as the distance between us grew palpable, a quiet ache settling into every shared silence, I couldn't bring myself to regret what had happened. How could I? That night wasn't just about passion or curiosity. It was about discovering something raw and undeniable within myself. For years, I buried my feelings under layers of friendship, convincing myself that Jake's presence in my life was enough. But lying awake at night, replaying the way his hands had moved over me, the desperation in his voice when he whispered my name, I realized how much I'd been lying to myself. He wasn't just my best friend. He never had been. And though our bond now carried an unspoken tension, fragile and complicated, it didn't diminish what we'd shared. If anything, it amplified it. The fallout wasn't easy. Jake stopped calling as often, his texts shorter, less frequent. When we did meet, there was a cautiousness in his movements, like he was afraid of overstepping again. Yet beneath the surface, I saw glimpses of the man who had once known me better than anyone else. A lingering glance across the table at dinner. The way his fingers brushed mine when passing the salt accidental, maybe, but electric all the same. These moments weren't casual anymore. They were echoes of a night neither of us could forget. I tried to imagine going back to the simplicity of laughter without weight, hugs without hidden meaning, but the thought felt hollow. We'd crossed the line, and while it came with consequences, it also revealed truths I might have spent a lifetime avoiding. Loving Jake wasn't safe. It never had been. But wasn't that what made it so achingly beautiful? The risk of losing him forever was real, looming over us like a storm cloud refusing to break. Yet, even knowing that, I wouldn't trade the memory of his touch for anything. It was messy, yes, but it was also more real than anything I'd ever known. In the end, I accepted that some risks are worth taking, no matter the cost. Jake would always hold a piece of my heart, not because of what we did, but because of what it taught me, that love doesn't always fit neatly into boxes. That desire can rewrite you in ways you never expect. And though our relationship might never return to its former ease, I found solace in knowing this much: he would always be special to me. Not as a lover, not even as a friend, but as something deeper, more complex, carved into the very fabric of who I am. Some scars don't heal completely, but they remind you that you lived, and sometimes that's enough.